Welcome back. All right, news of the day video for all you fine people for your Thursday, May the 11th. Don't be surprised when the playoffs are getting closer and closer to wrapping up if there's more news to report as we start getting into the free agency, getting closer to the draft and all that. Yeah, once those things get closer, the news and a lot of speculation picks up. So Darnell Nurse's suspension's been upheld. I'm honestly kind of surprised, and it was handed over to Department of Player Safety. Normally, hockey operations takes care of this, so it's just unusual all around. And as a result, Jay Woodcroft, which is part of the rule, he's fined $10,000 for what happens there. Now, I'm going to come back to this because I think I've talked about this before, and it's very often a conversation about what would happen if I was commissioner. What would I do? And I have some very strong beliefs about what happened in that game last night in terms of what Nurse did in that fight with Haig. I mean, the fact that Haig throws the first punches is one way to look at it, and I've seen that a lot. But Nurse was also the third man in. There was already Fogel, and Fogel was paired off with Haig, and then Nurse comes in. But I will come back to this, promise. Stick around till the end. Daniel Briere, I did not mention this morning, and I apologize. He no longer has the interim tag. He is officially the general manager of the Flyers. One of the worst kept secrets in hockey. We kind of knew that Briere was going to be the guy. And so Daniel Briere, now the full-time general manager with the Flyers. Looking forward to what the plan is going forward. Going back to the dark orange is the first thing. Both on I've seen it on their Facebook, on their Twitter, I believe as well. They're promoting the new era of orange, which means going back to the dark orange, this shade of orange, rather than the really, really bright color of orange they have been wearing. I'm really glad that bright color of orange is being phased out completely. First you had the Oilers going back to blue. Now you have the Flyers going back to a darker shade of orange. I never understood the really bright safety vest color of orange being the one of choice for the NHL and the teams that wore it. So I'm in full support of going back. Keep in mind, though, it's the Flyers. They do not change things much at all. I wouldn't expect much of a change when it comes to stripes. They just don't. They are very resistant to any kind of a change, which I admire. I do. I admire that they know their identity and they stick to it. Gabe Landeskog had surgery, is staying very positive. And when he was asked about, has he considered retirement, his answer is no. So the positive side is there, and he's very thankful for all the thoughts and prayers that have been extended to him from fans. And he seems very positive about this. Of course, we know he will not play this upcoming season. He has a long road ahead of him for rehabbing and even thinking about coming back and playing in the NHL. There is still that debate about whether or not he will be able to come back and play in the NHL due to the nature of this surgery and just how bad that knee has been, that he has to have the cartilage transplant. So all the best to him. Fingers crossed on that one. We shall see. It's already been announced by Toronto that Woll will start Game 5. Samsonov is not available, so it's not a huge surprise that Woll's going to start. I don't think it would have mattered if Samsonov was available anyways. The Gudis hit last night on camp. There wasn't a fine for that or anything. The NHL opting just to deal with the suspensions in the Vegas-Edmonton game from last night. And they haven't announced the suspension yet for Pietrangelo. I'm guessing it's going to be a game. Maybe two, but probably just a single game. That's my guess. But I am mildly surprised that the hit on Kempf didn't draw any sort of a fine or anything. There are definitely situations in a lot of these games where, and again, I mentioned this before, the hitting is much higher in the playoffs. You're going to have more of these incidents, and then we don't hear much of anything about them after, which is part of the reason I don't talk about them that much during the recap videos. The Vancouver Canucks, their training camp will be held in Victoria, September 21st to 25th. And this is, of course, good news. That'll be great for the city of Victoria. The Canucks right now, though, there's a lot of discussion about Vancouver and their approach to next season. So they've already started promoting locally that next season starts now because they want people to buy season tickets. And they seem to be promoting pretty heavily the idea that they're going to be better next year and they're going to be better prepared. For anybody wanting JT Miller to be traded, JT Miller's been prominent in all the advertising as well. I'm not saying they can't throw together another advertisement if they trade him, but I really don't think he's going anywhere. The one question is, they're already over the salary cap for next season. So how are they going to get under that salary cap? And the fear is there's a fear locally that number 11 draft pick for the Canucks, they might look at and say, it's number 11. It's not going to be ready anyways. We can trade that. And we can use that. We can move out another contract and we can get under the cap and we can look at making our team better for next year. It is that short-sighted thinking the Canucks have employed. Really, I mean, Benning did it. Gillis did it on some level too. The difference being that with Mike Gillis, they were a contending team at the time. So it was understandable with Gillis through most of his run. It was baffling under Benning. It's baffling if they're going to do this again. But that's the concern, is that the Canucks may look that short-term route to get into the playoffs next year and try to make their team more competitive and be willing to trade a draft pick at the top of this year's draft. Again, this year's draft is considered very deep. There's a good defenseman that would be available at number 11. And so if they decide to trade that pick, there might be a video coming for me if they do that, and it may not be very pleasant. So we'll see. But that's the fear locally, and I wish I could stand here and say there's no way they would trade that first round pick. That'd be crazy. But then I think about it and go, yeah, crazy. That's about right. Anyways, I wanted to close this out though talking about penalties and suspensions. Every single night there's all this discussion about it. I think that in terms of penalties and suspensions, it's weird, isn't it? So Nurse gets a suspension for instigating. I'm not saying that instigating shouldn't be a penalty. I'm just thinking to myself, Haig threw a lot of punches there, and Haig and Nurse were both smiling as they skated off the ice. I think penalties and suspensions should be graded on two things. Number one should be the risk of injury, and very often it's not. Very often the risk of injury is not the penalty. Fair play I have as number two, and those should be the two things. And fair play meaning hooking, little slashes, just little plays where you're aggravating the player with the puck that keeps them from getting that shot off, right? So that is important, but it sometimes feels like those penalties are called more consistently than the ones where there's a risk of injury. And as a league where skaters skate as fast as they do, and there's as much hitting in the playoffs as there is, risk of injury should be taken a little more seriously than I think that it is. And it's kind of baked into the rules as they are. So I've talked about this before. Anytime I hear somebody say, well, what rule would you get rid of? I'd get rid of the instigator. I don't think there's a place for the instigator in the league right now because we don't have nearly as many fights as we used to. We don't have bench clearing brawls. I think it's insane that Woodcroft gets fined 10 grand for Nurse from last night because that was a fight they had apparently agreed to. Apparently, Mark Stone said that this was a fight they had agreed to on the face-off prior to that. So Nurse was just coming in and obliging. And Nurse and Haig had been going at it all night. So it's not like, usually when I think about an instigator, it's where two guys are, talking or whatever, or maybe you just have a guy, and a guy just comes over and starts wailing on him. And that's not what that was. Meanwhile, we can see in other games where guys are punching guys while they're down. And this happens all the time. But in the playoffs, it gets amplified. And so I think there needs to be some kind of revisiting of the rules. I just mean in general. I think the National Hockey League needs to look at the rules. For instance, coming out of the GM meetings, there was the one comment from Colin Campbell, which basically threw out there that high sticks with the masks, the helmets and the visors, that high sticks aren't as serious as they used to be before we had helmets and visors and everything, which is true. And so I think there's room there to, mess with the rule book a little bit. Maybe instead of having 2, 4, and 5, maybe have 3-minute penalties. Maybe have a 6-minute. Basically sit down and come up with this so that certain penalties will be a little more seriously taken up. And hopefully players will think twice before they throw that late hit. Think twice before they high stick somebody in the face. Think twice before that vicious slash in the corner. And give referees more to work with. I always feel kind of bad for the officials. I'm saying kind of, not entirely, but kind of bad for the officials. Game takes place very, very quickly. They have to make the decision right on the spot like that. It's not an easy job. Rod Brindamore, in the interview where he was talking about how all the penalties should be reviewed, He said these are the best guys in the world at calling the game, and he said they don't have all the tools they need to call the game well. So he wasn't saying the referees are crap, because I hear that a lot, and it's like, yeah, I hear that at AHL games. I could, go down the street to a BCHL game. I could go that way to a WHL game, and I'm going to hear that at any hockey game ever. But you've got to give the officials, I think better guidelines, better rules would be important for the league. I don't think there's any desire for it. Um, but there needs to be more consideration for risk for injury. There are hits that are legal that will injure players, and to me, if that's not worthy of any kind of a penalty, I just find that odd. I just find that just really, really odd. But I'd be interested to know your thoughts. Again, I would scrap the instigator penalty. So in my world, Nurse wouldn't be suspended, and then various other penalties I think would have varying degrees of punishment, and you could change around which penalties are worth how many minutes. And so some penalties we would say, okay, this because of risk of injury, this is a more serious penalty, so it's going to be 3 minutes on the power play rather than two. Something just that small could make a huge difference. Look at what power plays have been like this year. Give a team a one more minute on the power play, it could make a huge difference. But let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.